I've always loved a good happily ever after. I know, it sounds cheesy, but it's true. That's part of the reason why I went to a bookstore 3 years ago. Many people had told me about this one book. They said it was a very cute, romantic story and just great overall. Even before I read it, it was normalized in my mind as a very cute, romantic, great book. However, it really wasn't. There were many creepy behaviors towards the main female protagonist, and the male love interest had a habit of stalking and harassing her. In an odd twist of fate, a year later, a man stalked me through the aisles of the same bookstore, asking me questions about my name and my age and the like. I'm convinced that if I had not read the book that normalized those behaviors, that I would not have been so quiet. But what happened instead was I bought the next collection of books and I left quickly. That night, I read the most popular book in that collection, Pride and Prejudice, published in 1813 by Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice was fascinating to me because it had an independent heroine with a male love interest who respects her. So I read more modern romance books and more books from Jane Austen's collection to compare the two. What I found was that in the modern romance books, there's a sense of entitlement towards the female characters, a sense of proprietary ownership. It's stuff like the man saying that the woman couldn't talk to her male friends anymore, or bothering her until she went on a date with him. However, in Jane Austen's collection, the relationships were healthy, and the majority of the female characters were independent and strong. And thus, Jane Austen prompted my journey into the relationships women hold with themselves, the media, and academics. I started this project with a simple question. How does the feminism displayed in Jane Austen's novels and life differ from the more misogynistic ideals of patriarchal society? So, not simple at all. It later turned into a more basic question. Was Jane Austen a feminist, and how can we relate this to modern literature? Now, Jane Austen is known in modern society as a witty master novelist. She was born on December 16, 1775, in Steventon, England. She lived during the Regency period. Now, let me be clear, the Regency period sucked. It was terrible. Society was patriarchal, and when women were under the total control of male figures in their lives. This includes husbands, brothers, and fathers. When a woman married, she would forfeit all of her rights to her husband. This includes the rights to her body, money, and property. Women with different socioeconomic statuses held essentially the same rights, but they had very different experiences. Women with a low status would not have access to education and could have to resort to potentially unfavorable jobs, such as prostitution. Women were expected to keep house and take care of the family, and the majority of marriages were strategic and calculated, ways to unite families and provide financial aid. Now, how does this relate to feminism? Well, feminism is the belief in the equity of the sexes and the intent to advance female rights socially, politically, and economically. Clearly, Austen supported the future elementary concept of feminism because of her profession. It was not the norm for women to publish and write novels in the Regency period, but she did regardless. Austen also never got married. Although she was engaged for a day, she didn't walk down the aisle. Austen had faith in the concept that money or status should not be the force driving oneself to commit to marriage. She advised her niece, Fanny Knight, anything is to be preferred or endured rather than marrying without affection. Undoubtedly, these ideals also carried over to her books of defying societal marriage norms. In a personal interview with Professor Devoney Looser, professor of English at Arizona State University and author of The Making of Jane Austen, Looser stated, "I think Austen is a social critic who is deeply disturbed by how middle-class, educated women in particular are restricted and limited in their life choices and the pressure to marry. She was especially concerned about a system in which women were pushed towards marriages for economic comfort and family advantage." For example, in Pride and Prejudice, the most popular, Austen demonstrated a textbook example of standards forced upon women. In the book, the odious Mr. Collins proposed to the main character, Elizabeth Bennet. Now, let me be clear. Mr. Collins was repulsive. You do not want to marry this guy. The most astonishing thing was that Elizabeth rejects him. Now, this was weird because he had a good income and he was a higher socioeconomic status than her. This would be a rarity in the Regency period. Furthermore, in Persuasion, the main character, Anne, is having a debate with a gentleman when they come upon the topic of relationships and privilege. Anne declares, "Men have every advantage of us in telling their own story. Education has been theirs in so much higher degree. The pen has been in their hand. All the privilege I claim for my own sex is not a very enviable one. You need not covet it. And Anne was right. Throughout history and literature, women have been barred from their perspectives on events. However, there are things Austen couldn't consider writing about that are prevalent in modern literature. For example, the one-dimensional female characters such as the manic pixie dream girl stereotype that only exists to better the man. There's also the demonization of teenage girls that have sex. In many books, the male love interest has had sex dozens of times before and is worshipped for it, but his love interest is always a virgin. Books and other media can perpetuate ideas and influence decisions. When literature normalizes misogynistic standards, it permeates the minds of children and adolescents. Although there is a wider variety of books nowadays, and many promote gender equality, many romance novels still tell teens that stereotyping is cute, harassment is romantic, and toxic masculinity is charming. If this continues, we'll have more and more girls content in their roles of the weak, helpless victims. That is not a happily ever after, that is the end. Thank you.